We go ahead and get started. Amy, are you there to start the recording?
Already done. Ready for
Okay,
you.
excellent. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the last session of the day for the 2020 Northwest Wisconsin Lakes Conference. My name is Mike Engleson. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Lakes, the statewide association of lake organizations and individuals that care about lakes. And this session is COVID-19 impacts on lake organizations. I'll be talking about how lake organizations are dealing with the pandemic and maybe getting some information from and ideas from you all as well. I'll start my video so that you can see me. And so you can type information or questions into the chat box, which if you've been with us all day and we're new to Zoom then, you probably already know. It's probably down at the bottom of your screen. There's a menu bar that you'll scroll over, it'll pop up and you can click chat and type into that. I'm more than happy to try to answer questions as we go through this presentation. I've got a lot of slides, but there's a lot of information and we can go any number of different ways. I'm not tied to anything absolutely in particular on it. So let's get right into it. We'll talk about in this session sort of where we are currently in this strange summer of 2020 that we're in. Talk about some impacts on different things that you might normally do as a lake organization and how being in a pandemic, you might be able to manage those and the things you can and can't do. Talk a little bit about the importance of communications in these times. I've got a slide with some resources of places that you can go for more information. And then, of course, as I said, all of your questions. And before I get going, I should thank Amy Kowalski from UW Extension Lakes, who has been my Zoom wrangler all afternoon in this session. And so she sort of serves as my producer in the background, I guess, and makes the technology work. And she's been doing a great job. So thank you, Amy. A little bit about Wisconsin Lakes in case you're not familiar with us. As I said, we're a statewide nonprofit organization. We've been around since, well, just over 20 years now, 25 years. Our mission really is to promote healthy lakes. We are do consider ourselves a conservation organization, though we represent mostly waterfront property owners, provide education and technical assistance to lake organizations, and in the last 2 months, that's mostly meant either answering one-on-one questions or holding webinars or appearing on other people's webinars to talk about what I am talking about over the next hour. We also advocate for sound science-based lake and water policy in the state, and we work with our regional and statewide partners on events like the Lakes and Rivers Convention in April, the Red Cedar Conference in March, and the Northwest Conference here today. And you can check us out at wisconsinlakes.org. It's our website. It's got all sorts of information, and you can sign up for our emails and all that kind of stuff. So let's get right into it. I think the most important thing to consider with everything that's going on is that we are sort of, as far as what you can and cannot do, it's a bit of hyperbole, I suppose, but it is really kind of the wild west, especially since the statewide orders were shot down. Whatever you thought of those orders, they did at least provide some consistency across the state on what could and couldn't be done. And now as we've begun the opening up process, as infection rates of COVID have seemed to, at least initially, had been dropping, it's kind of all over the place, all over the state, and who it is that you're talking to. So some of the important questions we'll get to are like, how do you know, you need to know what your own restrictions are, where your own levels of activities can be, but then often depending on who you're talking to, you need to know who's telling them what they can do. Because if you're talking to somebody from your county, they may be under a completely set different set of rules than if you're talking to someone from DNR. And we'll try to get a little bit into the specifics of where those rules are at right now in some coming slides. But my main message in this really is, in the end, at this point, a lot of what you do is up to you. There are not, as far as individuals, especially working with lake organizations, there may not be a lot of official restrictions on what you are able to do. So you just need to make sure that you've taken all of the information in that you can get and make a decision for yourself on how to proceed on these sorts of things, and then go forward. And for some organizations, that may mean being very careful and not doing a whole lot, making sure that there is, all of the CDC guidelines are followed. Other organizations may not feel that those things are necessary. I'm not here, at least, to judge anybody's decisions as to how to proceed, but sort of to tell you where the lay of the land is and think about some things that you might want to think about. So first off, know your rules. I think most county health departments, even if they do have orders in place, I believe that most counties in the state have begun at least to move into a phased reopening. I know even in Dane County, where we were fairly strict right from the get-go, and was one of the counties that early on had a number of cases relative to other parts of the state, we did have a county order that was in place, and we've already moved into our phase 2 of that just this week. So definitely restrictions are being released. Maybe not so much in Milwaukee County, from my understanding, but many places in the state, and as far as I know, the majority of counties in Northwest Wisconsin, at least, really probably don't have a whole lot of orders in place. But if they do, or if there are other governmental restrictions on what you can do, you really want to know where you are. It's an important consideration. And even in thinking in terms of where are you going to be in the future, if you're planning an event or a meeting, or thinking about even doing clean boats, clean waters over the course of the summer, where are things going to be in August? If there is an uptick in cases, are new restrictions going to be put in place? Could things get, continually get better? And will you be able to open up more and do more things? And what does that mean for your planning? So flexibility probably is a key, most certainly, because if there's one thing that we've learned in the last few months, it's that we really don't know for sure what's going on, and what even the next couple of weeks holds, let alone a couple of months forward. Make sure that my chat is updating in case there are any questions. All right. So then the second thing is to really know what the rules that the people you are talking to are under. So even to the extent, if you are an organization that normally holds a meeting in a church or a government building, or even a privately run facility, they may have their own restrictions in place. I've talked to a couple of lake associations and districts that have said they normally hold their meetings at a church that have, ostensibly have a large enough space that they would be able to social distance and hold meetings inside, but that the facility has said, we're just not allowing anyone outside of our own core activities to do that, and that's impacted the timing and the location of their meeting. So that's something that you need to consider. When you're talking to the state, the state, most state agencies, or all state agencies, I guess, as far as I understand, certainly DNR is following the original Badger bounce back plan that Governor Evers announced back in April, I think that was. I believe Badger bounce back is officially into phase 1 at this point. This is one of those plans that has the metrics. You've probably seen graphics on TV or in online or in newspapers of the green and red lights on 6 different gating criteria. Right now, I don't think think we've only, well, I looked at it yesterday or this morning, and I think the state was 3 of the lights were green and 3 were red. But I know that DNR has announced that they are going into phase 1. But even then, not every agency is at the same level of planning and ready to implement things as another agency is. So DNR, I think their phase 1 begins today, or it officially impacts most people on Monday. Um, but not much from sounds like it's going to change. There's still only high level, uh, crucially important field work being done. Most employees are not being allowed back into their regular office spaces and are continuing to telecommute. So not a ton, at least on Monday, from my understanding, is going to change a whole lot as far as the way that DNR is working. So things like in-person trainings are probably still going to be on hold. You can look for, continued use of virtual trainings for things like that. And if you have people that would normally come talk to you or be out in the field in your area, that probably is not going to happen still for the next few weeks, as I understand it. UW Extension folks may be under a slightly different set of rules, as might employees of different universities. And I believe that UW Extension Lakes is actually under the rules put in place by UW Stevens Point, because that's where they're located, while some other places are in Extension are under UW Madison, and so they follow UW Madison. Um, so again, really, if you have to deal with someone, finding out from them what rules they're working under will help you understand what they might be able to do for you. This even reaches to the point of considering what's going on a landing. So again, if you're looking at Clean Boats, Clean Waters, or uh, an AIS decontamination program or something like that, who owns the landing and what are their restrictions? A local government may have different restrictions on their landings than the state or even the National Park Service landing. So even federal employees have to be taken into account when you're talking to them. Let's get a little bit into some specifics, and I'm going to report out on things that I know. I'm not necessarily an absolute expert on any of these programs. Wisconsin Lakes has done 3 webinars over the last month or so of its own in conjunction with UW Extension Lakes. And so we did one last week on Clean Boats, Clean Waters with Aaron McFarland and Alex Delvoye, who both work on CBCW. So I'm basing some of this off of what they've told me. I heard from Eric Olson, the director at Extension Lakes, literally like minutes ago, about a half an hour ago, that some of their FAQs on their webpage about Clean Boats, Clean Waters have been updated. So if this is something that you have looked into in the past, you might want to visit that page again, and it's got some updated information. I didn't have time to go through and look and see what exactly was new and was updated. But if you just Google Clean Boats, Clean Waters and find the UW Extension page on it, you'll be able to get that information. Similar to what I said at the beginning, the overall message from the program is that it really is up to individual organizations and your volunteers and paid staff as to how fast to implement a landing monitoring program. There are a number of recommendations that are available from Extension Lakes, and in fact, they put together a really nice set of recommendations with their own kind of version of a phased plan, but those really are just recommendations. There is nothing that the state is saying that we are preventing you from doing these activities. Some organizations have told me that they have their volunteer base is all over 65 or in at-risk categories for getting COVID-19 and having it not go well. And they've decided that they are not going to monitor at all this summer, while there have been other organizations that have been chomping at the bit from the get-go and really started their monitoring programs right up, even before Clean Boats, Clean Waters technically started up on June 1st this year. And no one at the agencies, as far as I know, is passing any judgment on either of those decisions or anywhere in between. Um, and again, it really is something that is up to the individual. They are recommending that social distancing be maintained at the landings. So, as part of, for instance, as part of the phase opening for in phase one, which we are in right now, the recommendation is that if it's a very busy landing that would typically have more than 10 people gathered on the landing at the same time, that might be a place that is at higher risk. So it's a place you might consider holding off on starting up. Once you get into phase two, I think it's around 50 people at the landing, so that's going to open up a lot more busy landings. And regardless, you want to maintain social distancing. Masks are recommended by the program and, in fact, available to be ordered online. They also have some yard signs that try to that emphasize the fact that they're not only trying to help with stop aquatic invasive species, but also trying to be safe and be neighborly and um, help not spread the disease as people go about getting out on the water and enjoying their boating. If you have a Clean Boats, Clean Water grant, those funding for those will go through. Again, the agency's not making a judgment if you decided it was safe enough to start, so you can submit to get reimbursements for those. You can defer the grant if you've decided that it's not safe and you're not going to run a program this year. There is the possibility that the grant can be deferred until 2021, but you need to talk to the DNR and do so relatively soon so that they know that that's going on. I believe Alex Delvoye, who I think might be on the session today, so if I'm saying anything wrong, Alex, you can jump in, would be the person to talk to about that. You can get links for that through DNR and through Extension Lakes as well. She says I'm doing great, so apparently I paid attention last week. I think it's important to note too that whatever your group decides to do on how much or any work to be done this year doesn't impact your future grant eligibility for Clean Boats, Clean Waters. And they really want to emphasize that human safety comes first. Of course, it's important to stop the spread of aquatic invasive species, but we don't want people getting sick or feeling pressured by any means to do things that they don't need to do. If they choose not to. Other programs that have potentially been impacted by the pandemic would include if your organization is running a decontamination station or project. Again, remember to make sure you know what the landing owners or supervising agencies rules are. A question that I've gotten quite often is if we run a decontamination station, or really if we do any of these kind of activities that I'm talking about, including Clean Boats, Clean Waters, and holding meetings, anything, is what about liability? Can someone sue me, sue our organization if they get sick? And my answer is it's an open question. I don't have a real definitive answer for you on that. First of all, liability is very situational to begin with. Some people have told me, and some people being people with of attorney bents, have said that it's in most cases it's going to be hard to make a liability claim. Number one, it's hard to prove where it is that someone got sick. It definitively enough maybe to win a lawsuit, but there's also a premise that if you take part in activities, you assume some risk in taking part in those activities. So and everybody probably should know that there is a pandemic going on in the country right now, in the world, and that if you go outside and do things and interact with people, there's a chance you might catch catch something as a result. And so there's some assumption of risk that you're already taking that limits the liability of an organization that's doing anything. Where you could run into some questions is, if your organization has set up particular rules and they're explicitly, if you're not following the rules that you have set up for your own organization, especially if you're doing it with sort of gross negligence or intentionally, then you might be able to run into some problems. Um, but I don't think it's something that necessarily rises to the level that you have to be really, really concerned about. I think your own feelings of safety and whether you feel like the disease is a problem for your people in general probably trumps the liability question. Um, if you're running a decontamination station, been a long day. Running your decontamination station as part of a grant, and it's funded by that grant, you should be able to still get reimbursed for that as part of the surface water grant program. And in fact, expenses are reimbursable as normal over the course of the summer for surface water grants. Again, the agency's taking no position on whether activities should be undertaken. So if you do something that is fundable, you should be able to get paid for it under the regular terms of your grant. Even with any surface water grant, just like Clean Boats, Clean Waters, if there's a reason that you can't do something that you would, I think if you talk to DNR, they'll work with you. Everyone understands that this is not a normal summer as far as operations go. Citizen monitoring programs are also beginning to move along. As I understand it, the labs are open and taking samples so that they can be sent in, so you can be collecting data. Again, keep in mind that the program staff is going to be limited by their agency and their institutional rules as far as doing training or support, so just keep that in mind. I think both Citizen Lake Monitoring Network under Paul Skowinski and Water Action Volunteers under Becky Compton have been pretty communicative with their volunteers. So hopefully you're up to speed on what's going on with them, but you can certainly check in with their websites to get more information as the summer goes on. All right, get into meetings, but I got to take a drink first. Been talking a lot today. A few of you in the audience are probably saying, "What's new, Mike?" But voice is beginning to go. So let's get into meetings, and we've had lots and lots of questions. I probably spend 2-3 hours a day either on email or phone talking to organizations about how to work through meeting issues in the pandemic. Of course, for all organizations, gatherings are going to be controlled by any local orders, or as I said, restrictions on gathering in particular buildings if the people that own the buildings have them. And so that has to be taken into an account before you go ahead and plan the meeting. And again, it's probably worthwhile if your meeting's not till August to be thinking ahead of what's going to happen if we've booked the church now, but the church comes back to us, or an outbreak is attributed to that building and it gets shut down. Having backup plans is probably not a bad idea. The second point is, don't forget what your bylaws say as far as you can do or not do. If you're going to run into problems with an organization or get things challenged by membership, this is a place where it's going to happen. So if your lake association bylaws say that your annual meeting is on the first Saturday of June, you need to think about, and you decide that you need to move it, you need to think about how are you going to do that in a way that is in keeping with your bylaws. These are extraordinary circumstances, so there are good reasons to get around these issues. and there are probably ways that can be done so properly, but especially if you're going to have something controversial discussed or a major expenditure discussed at a meeting, it's a good idea to make sure that you've done everything that you need to do. And unfortunately, that can be complicated in some situations. At the same time, if the bylaws are silent, just says that we'll hold an annual meeting at some point during the year, even if it's traditionally been in June, maybe it's enough for your, if you're an association, for your board of directors to send out a message that just says, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are holding off on scheduling our annual meeting. We'll hold it by a certain time or something like that. Or you're just waiting to see whether the situation improves and you can hold it later in the year. We've had a lot of questions about, do we do something in person or do we do something virtual? Capabilities from technology and the ability of your audience to join in on something like this is, of course, something that goes into those sorts of questions. There are some special considerations that Lake districts have to take into account, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But there's no right answer as to in-person versus virtual. I can tell you that as Wisconsin Lakes, we hold at least one of our board of directors meetings every year completely virtually already, and are able to operate perfectly fine doing so. So it's certainly possible, and I think we're all getting more and more comfortable with things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or whichever service you decide to use. So it is simpler, but there are always some things that might cause wrinkles in whether virtual is a good idea. Voting is one of them, and I'll get to that on one of the next couple of slides. Another consideration as you're working through all these sort of functional, how do we do this? Is it virtual or in person? That I think is important to take into account is, what's your attendance going to be under different scenarios? So if you are an organization that has a lot of people that are at risk in your membership, are they going to want to attend an in-person meeting? What's the feeling on the seriousness of the pandemic amongst your membership? Again, some organizations may feel very, in general, there may be a lot of strong feelings that we need to be cautious. Some may be more opening to getting things going and are willing to show up and hold in-person meetings. I was talking to a group this past week that said, they're holding their annual meeting and they're even having food, box lunches instead of a buffet, but they are still eating together, albeit they're doing it as a picnic outside rather than having a meeting inside. Any questions up to this point? I don't see anything in the chat box, but feel free to add things in as they come up. But if not, I'll move on. And we'll talk now first talk about lake associations, and then I'll get into lake districts. As I kind of alluded to already, lake associations have a lot more freedom than lake districts do. Lake associations are run-of-the-mill nonprofit organizations. You're most likely incorporated in Wisconsin under Chapter 181. You might not even be incorporated and just be an unincorporated association. But either way, you, as an association, statutorily, you don't have a lot of restrictions that you absolutely have to follow. Your bylaws might have some, and there are a few things in the statutes that have to be followed. But for the most part, you have a lot of freedom to set up how you meet and how you make decisions in ways that can vary greatly from organization to organization. The statutes actually explicitly say, for in a non-stock corporation incorporated under Chapter 181, that you may hold votes by electronic means unless your bylaws say that you can't. So unless there is a bylaw that says we can't vote on things, most nonprofits are able to hold a virtual meeting and do some form of a voice vote. For instance, in the way I look at that in Zoom is that if you if you click on the participant list at the in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen, sort of near where the chat is, you get a list of everybody that is in your meeting. And then there are some reactions that you can make. So you can click yes or you can click no. And I think that's an excellent way to get at least, you may not need to like count um, uh, the number of yeses and record them, but you could consider that almost an analog to a voice vote. So if most of the vote would turn up green in that instance, then you can decide that the motion has carried. Where that can run into a problem is if it's a vote where you do need an absolute count. In that case, you'd have to stop and really take stock of the count. Or if you're worried about whether or not people are actually qualified to vote, so if you're an association and have strict membership rules on who can vote and who can't, how many votes a household gets or something like that, which may very well be the case if you're a qualified lake association in order to get a surface water grant. You have to take into account that as you design the voting scheme. But there are definitely ways to use those participant reactions in Zoom. Not many of the other services that I've seen have quite as robust a system of reactions as that, but they may have other things that you're able to use. And of course, you can always use if the chat box as well to just have people type in yes or no. It's a little easier maybe then to see who they are. The chat gets recorded, so if you're recording the meeting like this one is being done, then you have a record of who has said what that you can get back to. It's not always perfect, so it's probably worth running a test run of that before you try it for yourself so you understand exactly how it works. But that is certainly a possibility as well. And I'm speaking mostly about using those sorts of systems for lake associations right now, because again, you have much more flexibility in determining how you can do voting. Um, it may even be that you could have a virtual meeting, present the issue, have the discussion over the issue through live conversation or through chat, and then adjourn and initiate a vote via email. Um, that works. That can be more difficult if there are a lot of people that are voting, but if it's a small group, 10 or 15, if it's just your board of directors, that can still work fairly well. I've also used a fill-in Google form as a ballot. Then that all gets dumped into a single spreadsheet and your organization has a record of that vote. So a lot of different ways that you can get around the voting problem, especially if you're an association. Anybody on as an association that has an association specific question? All right. Lake districts, and if you're not familiar with the difference, unlike a nonprofit lake association, a lake district is a special purpose unit of government authorized by Chapter 33. There's a formal procedure that lake districts go through to be created. Districts, anyone that lives within a district or owns property within a district is automatically part of the district. Districts are able to tax um, the properties within the district, a small amount of property tax that goes right through on the person's property tax bill for that property, which they're then able to use for lake management activities. Districts have been around since the 70s, and they have done a lot of good work in being able to sort of leverage funding in an area to manage both AIS problems. Some districts are used to manage to own or repair dams if it's an impoundment and there are issues. But districts are a form of government, so they are required to follow the statutes that created them, and in some cases, statutes relating to elections. So one issue in the pandemic that districts have run up against is that their annual meetings, which every district has to hold an annual meeting, it has to be between May 22nd or September 8th, unless the district has voted at a previous annual meeting to establish a different date. So the vast majority of districts have to have their meetings done by September 8th. So even if they're able to postpone them because of the pandemic, they're only able to postpone them so far. When the original statewide order was in place, we really were in a panic because it made it almost impossible for districts to hold in-person meetings. And an in-person meeting is absolutely necessary, at least in my opinion. An annual meeting really cannot be done virtually because of the requirement that you have to vote on a commissioner, and it has to be done by a secret ballot. I'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. But at least in my opinion, a Lake District annual meeting almost has to be held in person. That's become at least a little bit easier from the not violating existing laws or health department orders, because in most places those sorts of meetings can take place. You run into problems if it's a large district and you normally have 150 people come to a meeting. That might be a gathering that's not allowed, so maybe you still have that problem. But I've not heard of a lot of districts that have expressed that as being something that an issue that they would have to overcome. The other thing that districts have to comply with that lake associations do not is open meetings law. Open meetings law says that meetings have to be transparent and accessible to everyone, and that in itself causes a problem with both virtual and in-person socially distant meetings for reasons we'll get into. So at an annual meeting for a district, as I said, you have to vote on a commissioner and you also have to vote on an annual budget. The commissioner vote by law has to be by secret ballot and it has to take place at the meeting. There are also some new provisions that put some process on voting for commissioners that were just passed. The law passed literally in February, so weeks before the pandemic occurred. That new law provides a process for recounts in commissioner elections. I talked about that on an earlier session today, the Lake Policy update, so you can go back and listen to that if you wish, and if you have questions, we can go into more depth on what those rules say. But for this purpose, it really all leads to the fact that the Lake District Commissioner vote really needs to be in person in some way that makes that annual meeting difficult. We've tried to come up with some options of how to get around that. One suggestion we have made is that, well, the recommendation, I guess, that we've made is that if possible, you push out your annual meeting for as long as you can. So if you normally would meet in June, but you're able to push an annual meeting out until August, the hope would be that by August that we've moved into a new, more open phase. That's not necessarily a given though, and I don't know if that's even more likely than it was a few weeks ago. As I said, everything right now is kind of a crapshoot, so you kind of have to make your own judgment as a district as to what you want to do in those kind of cases. But that would at least afford you some time. You could try to defer the commissioner election until a later time. So convene your annual meeting, vote on the budget, which probably that can be done virtually because it doesn't necessarily have to be done by secret ballot, though there may still be some problems of knowing whether or not you have qualified voters voting. That's technically outside of the statute though, so you could run into a challenge if you try to do something like that. It's a little unclear whether you can convene your annual meeting, do some business, and then recess it in this extraordinary time. it could be that a court, if such an action was challenged, would find that reasonable under the circumstances because of uh, everything that's going on. But I can't give you any absolute confidence that that's the case. And really, on any of these sorts of things, especially where you're talking about either outright violating or taking a broad interpretation of a statute, it would not be a bad idea to consult actual legal counsel so that you have some backing on what your decision is going to be as you move forward on these sorts of things. Open meetings law is another issue. As I said, this applies to all Lake District meetings, so it would be both all the quarterly meetings of commissioners as well as annual and special meetings. The Department of Justice interprets the open meetings law and provides guidance. It has said explicitly that virtual meetings are allowed under open meetings law. This was true before the pandemic, so this is not anything that's particularly new. During the statewide stay-at-home orders, DOJ had said that it's okay to not have any physical location at all and hold the meeting virtually. The idea behind open meetings is that everyone should be given the opportunity to participate. Even if it's a Board of Commissioners meeting, it needs to be done in front of the public. And so the public should have the ability to watch at the very least, if not, if even if it's a meeting where they wouldn't normally have the ability to comment. And so there needs to be reasonable accommodations met to accomplish this. What is reasonable differs depending on what level of order and openness is in place. So when there was a complete lockdown order, in that case, it was probably okay to have a meeting where you don't have a centralized location at all, and you work with someone that comes to you and says, I have a hard time being able to watch this meeting. You find some way to make that happen for them. But for, it can still be something that happens online. Now that the orders have mostly been rescinded or things have been opened and in-person meetings are no longer um, uh, against some sort of order, we've probably fallen back into a place where open meetings law would require you to at least have a physical location. So the way I've seen this play out, especially with some school board rules that I've looked at, is that there will be a meeting that will be noticed to be in a particular place. If anybody wants to attend in that particular place, they have to contact the board to let them know that, so that things can be put into place. Chairs can be set socially distant, but the notice also says we are absolutely encouraging everyone possible to join us virtually. Here's the link. Here's how you do it. But then there will be one person from that board that is at that location and running the meeting, and possibly even that's where the virtual the software that's being used for the virtual meeting is generated from. So, it may still be a meeting at um, the town hall, but there's only one person there, and hopefully none of the public feels the need to come and show up there. You still need to make sure that that notice of that meeting includes both the physical location and how to join, and any information that needs to be put in place. If you go back and watch some of our early webinars on this, you can get to them through wisconsinlakes.org. They're on our Wisconsin Lakes YouTube channel. We talk about it more from the standpoint of there being an order in place, but the rules essentially are the same, just that you have some more openness and probably can't be that completely virtual. I'm happy to answer any questions on that if you have them, but that pretty much covers what I want to talk about as far as districts go. Just finish up with some thoughts on how to hold meetings in general. So now you know you can hold them. you know that you have to hold them. How the heck are you going to get around doing that? And so these are just some ideas that I've encountered in conversations with organizations. I'd be really interested if any of you are from lake groups that have met, and what you've done and how you've done it. And also, if you're planning meetings for the future, what kind of considerations have you made, and how are you getting around these various issues? So most everyone has said that we are going to meet socially distant if we're meeting, mostly outside. There's been most of the chatter that I've heard has been about trying to, even do it um, regardless of weather. But then there are questions of what to do if the weather becomes inclement, if there's a thunderstorm in the area or something like that. That's of course something that you need to think about. So you might want to plan a rain date for your meeting. If it looks like there's thunderstorms in the forecast, then you have a backup date that you can go to. Many organizations have talked about trying to do a hybrid of the in-person virtual, kind of what I was just talking about with open meetings, but doing that voluntarily. So having both options available: a socially distant in-person meeting, but having some sort of camera set up to where people that wanted to participate virtually can do so. That certainly will have is the ability to do that is certainly impacted by the quality of internet service in your area, and whether or not you have the technology and the equipment needed to do those sorts of things. We've talked about with a couple of lake districts about how to do voting in a no contact situation. So um, most districts will check people in off the property rolls, or they have to self-certify if they're an elector in the area. Um, how to do that with keeping people as far apart as possible. Um, One suggestion was that the property tax roll just be sort of set out, and that people can check off their name themselves as they come to the meeting. Maybe have someone observing that from a distance, so that hopefully um, no one is nefariously checking in or something like that. Some groups have said that they are going to have just pre-printed ballots and a pre-printed self-certification form that the voter will fill out, and then they take a ballot. They put that in, and they into a box and take a ballot from the next box. Depending on the size of your eligible voters in your district, or possibly your association, if you have bylaws that require stricter voting requirements. Um, that can be more or less complicated. I've had somebody say, "Oh, we've got, Bob's really handy. He's already built a plexiglass shield for the voting table, and we'll just make sure that the people who are checking folks in have lots of PPE, and then they'll move off to a socially distanced place, and it'll be all fine." So I'd be interested to hear how groups are getting around that problem, if there are other ideas that are out there. A really great idea, in order to help keep meetings short. A couple of groups have done this, as far as I know. They've actually pre-recorded presentations from their committees, or other entities that they would normally have report out at an annual meeting. And then rather than show them at the meeting, they just put them online on a YouTube channel or on their website, and then members can just go and watch those at their leisure, hopefully before the meeting. But if it's all containing information that is not necessary for a vote at that meeting, then they can sort of dispense with that relatively quickly, and don't have to spend the time sitting there listening to the people report out. It still gets the information out, but it just keeps the time together a little bit shorter. And then some groups have told me that they are, affirmatively going to have hand sanitizer and provide masks, and do other of the CDC recommended things as they go through the meeting. I've sort of covered these two bullets already, I think, but just to reiterate, as you go through this whole planning process, it's a good idea to consider how might things change by the time you get around to your meeting. So if you have an annual meeting scheduled for August 15th, um, you know, what is the world going to look like once you get to that point, and be ready to pivot if you need to. Um, this is true not only for events, but for outdoor festivals or other social events or fundraising events that you might be normally planning. Of course, a lot of things have already gotten canceled for the summer, and so I'm not really sure what lake organizations are doing as far as those sorts of things. But many of the outdoor events potentially could continue to go on if the attendance is not that high. Um, but again, think about what the timing is and then have those contingency plans in place if you need to go to them. Fundraising is also something that gets impacted by this, especially if if your fundraiser is normally an event that you raise money on. So what are you going to do about that? Well, one thing I think that can be helpful is look, not that we've had a pandemic that you can look back on, but fundraising is also impacted just by the economy. And if our economy is kind of going down, I think it's right for an organization to wonder, well, what's going to happen to our bottom line? What's happened during past crises? Uh, what happened in 2008? Did your organization see a dip in donations at that point? Did membership drop because people were pulling back on those sorts of expenditures? That might help you forecast what it is that you're going to have to come over. If your fundraiser is normally an event, can you shift to a virtual fundraiser? I've seen a number of groups. Um, you're not even actually doing anything online. It's basically just saying, we were not able to do this normal event this year. Um, would you be willing to chip in still the normal amount of money that you would spend on it, whether it's a ticket or what you would typically buy in concessions? Maybe there's a way to have some sort of premium, a t-shirt or a hat or something that people are still able to get. Couple of examples of this, I guess, and from the Madison area, the Clean Lakes Alliance normally holds a big Loop the Lake bike ride around Lake Monona, which they're not holding. So you were still able to participate in that though with the virtual Loop the Lake. They basically are saying, record yourself going on a ride or a run, really anywhere, and that'll be your Loop the Lake. You can submit that to us. We'll put it together in some sort of a highlight package. You'll still get a t-shirt. You'll still feel participating in something, and we'll still be able to raise some money off of it. Another example is the local professional soccer club down here, Forward Madison FC, held a virtual match against COVID-19 and raised, I think, $11,000 for first responders by selling tickets to their virtual match. It wasn't so much a fundraiser for them as it was for the community, but another kind of unique way that you can get around this problem. And then don't forget that you can just do the old special appeal mailing that uh, especially nonprofit groups have done for years and years and years. Any time of year, or at traditionally those are sent out at the end of the year, saying this is our need, and we're asking you to make a donation. We don't normally do this. If it's something that you don't normally do, you can explicitly say that and explain that we're asking, we still are trying to do all the things that we do for the lake that you have come to uh, want us to do and appreciate, but we can't do it without your support. And hopefully you'll get donations that way. That is an excellent lead into the importance of communication in this time. We're all distracted, obviously, with everything that's going on from the protests to the coming elections to just dealing with the pandemic. What are our kids going to be doing for school in the fall? What am I able to do with my kids over the course of the summer? All of those kind of things are additional pulls for our attention in a time when it was already hard to get messages out to people. So it's important to ask, how can you keep your organization relevant to your members, and how do you keep in contact with them? Do you need to up the frequency of your contacts so you're talking to them more frequently through emails or electronic communication, rather than, or start using that if you have not, if you've mostly relied on newsletters, just as a way to try to keep your organization's needs and messages in front of people. They're more likely to see them if they're getting them more frequently. A way to do that actually is to use your website as sort of a communications hub. This is a slide that I've used in talking about electronic communications. And the idea here is that all of the ways that your organization communicates with your members, and that's what the orange triangle or diamond in the middle represents, there can all be thought of as sort of an interconnected web. So what you do on your website can be referenced in emails and in social media if you do it, even in your newsletter, and you can keep a lot of information on that website. I know many lake organizations have even put a COVID-19 section on their website where they're able to report out to people on what's going on as far as local restrictions or what they're doing for meetings or how they're dealing with COVID-19 in their own organizations. Shameless plug slide. Wisconsin Lakes, one of our programs is called lakekit.net. We offer low cost, hopefully high quality website platform to lake organizations. You can go to lakekit.net and get more information about that. And there's a place, this is lakekit.net, and you can email us on the contact us or a join the network link. Will take you to an email that will send it, a question to us, and then we can talk to you about what that is and what that means. And lastly, here are some list of resources from our own website to the different places where you can get information about where different phased reopening plans are. There are so many phased reopening plans that I've pretty much decided I just need to come up with one for myself too, because I can't think about things in not terms of phases. It's like, Dad, what are we having for dinner? I'm like, well, we're in phase 3, so that means we can do chicken now. So all of these different options on the screen now are places that you can get information. DNR has its own list of information on COVID-19, and I assume that that will become even more robust as they begin to open up. And if you do Clean Boats, Clean Waters, that the UW Extension page is just full of information on their recommendations and how to proceed, how to contact about grants, and all of that kind of stuff. And that is all I have. And we're close to being out of time here. If anybody has any questions, comments, or thoughts about any of that, I am happy to take them now. And we are the last session of the day, so we certainly don't have to end at exactly 3:45. But I will see if there are any questions. And you can also see my contact information up there. Please feel free, especially if you have questions about your own organization and how it's reacting. I'll do my best to answer things individually. I do have some limitations in what I can say in terms of whether or not I can't give legal advice to a particular organization or situation, but I'm happy to talk to you and we'll let you know what I can and can't say. All right, well, I'm hoping this is a good sign that nobody actually has any questions, because most of these sorts of sessions, I get really specific, complicated questions about organizations, but maybe you all have worked through your organizational issues at this point. That would be great if that is true. So at this point, I guess we can conclude. I will say thank you to all of our partners and sponsors of the Northwest Lakes Conference. I do serve on the planning team with a couple of our board members are also on that. And so thanks to everyone from the Northwest Wisconsin Lakes Conference that has helped put this together and made the pivot to doing an online convention. I hope that this has worked out for both attendees and for everyone that runs the show. Thank you so much to Extension Lakes, to Amy and Eric and Patrick for helping run the various Zoom streams that have been going on. And of course to all of the organizations and business sponsors that we have supported us through all of this. And we really, really hope that next year we'll be able to meet in person again. I've been doing this conference for now, it's probably my 7th or 8th year that I've been attending. And every year previously, I have not been able to stay in the Northwest and do anything over the following weekend. This was the year that I had planned and had made, had begun to think about doing some things over the weekend and maybe doing some paddling up there. And of course, this is the year that I get stuck in Madison. So what can you do? Thanks again for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the water.